Well, good evening. I am delighted to be here for my friend Tad, and I'm delighted to be here for Teaching for Change and at Busboys and Poets, where I have had many a good meal, bought many a good book, heard many a good speaker, left many a good tip. I am cognizant that we're meeting in a pretty grim time, the kind of, month or week where people ask of themselves, boy, how could things get any worse? Well, our speaker tonight is an expert about how things could get horrifically worse, and more significantly, how to keep them from getting significantly worse. That is his value added, as we say, to the very important discussion of nuclear war, nuclear accident, nuclear disaster, nuclear holocaust, avoidance thereof. Yesterday, former Republican Senator from Oregon, Mark Hatfield, died, almost the last of a vanished race, a liberal Republican. And in reading his obituaries, I was always cognizant as a young man that Hatfield was elected to the Senate back in either 68 or 70 as an anti-war Republican, introduced legislation to end the Vietnam War, co-authored by George McGovern. But what I either had not known or had totally forgotten, that the obituary made clear, was that Hatfield had served in the Pacific during World War II, had been at Okinawa and Iwo Jima, and then had visited Hiroshima. And his already strong anti-war fervor was clearly put into a kind of understandable overdrive by that visit, and I think it suffused, the horror of that suffused much of the rest of his life's work. Tad, in the course of a career of anti-nuclear activism and scholarship, worked for some time with one of Hatfield's colleagues, another United States senator who not only was opposed to nuclear war, but who devoted the entirety of his retirement after 1992 to that cause, which is when Tad worked for him. That was Alan Cranston, former senator from California, and someone who I worked for a very long time ago as a young man when he was still in the Senate. That kind of perspective and dedication, but also real smarts, real strategic and tactical smarts that someone like Alan Cranston brought to this cause, is abundantly there on every page of Apocalypse Never, which not only talks common sense on the whole panoply of nuclear possibilities, each more terrifying than the next. And we've gone, of course, from being afraid of the kind of nuclear conflagration that was always implicit and there in the Cold War to other fears, including things that we've seen just in the last half year, nuclear accidents and where they can go. But even as all kinds of people who have been associated with nuclear strategy and nuclear war, many of them at some point in their life have sort of thrown up their hands and say, this is crazy. Why are we doing this? Why are we not reducing nuclear arsenals? Even as they have been saying this and doing this, as Tad points out in his book, the results have been far less than these changes and sentiments may have led one to hope. And the question, therefore, is how do you get from here to there? How do you get from a world which is still ridden with thousands and thousands of nuclear warheads and all the possibilities that creates for accident, mischief, or huge miscalculated strategy? How do we move from that world to the safer one where instead of nuclear deterrence, we're talking about nuclear elimination? Tad's book, Apocalypse Never, I think makes a real-world, plausible, brilliant, and well-written case for how we get from here to there. It's a very important book, and I'm delighted to welcome him here tonight. Tad Daley.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Andy Shalal of Busboys and Poets who invited me here, and I want to thank Don and Leticia from they're two separate entities, Busboys and Poets Restaurant and the marvelous Teaching for Change bookstore, which is just a real tremendous contribution to our cultural life here in D.C., especially the cultural life of the left. And I also want to tell you something about Harold Meyerson. Harold, for many years, was the progressive political sage at the LA Weekly. I lived in Southern California for many years, so got to know him back then. He is now the Wednesday op-ed columnist for the Washington Post. Many people know that Bernie Sanders is the only socialist member of the U.S. Senate. Fewer know, but more should know, that Harold Meyerson is the only socialist columnist for the Washington Post. But that's
much competition.
But that's not really Harold's most important incarnation. He is also editor of the American Prospect magazine. Here is my copy of a recent edition, and the American Prospect is really something, folks. It really offers a vision of what a holistic, inclusive, progressive, and most importantly, economically just society would look like, and every issue offers really practical political messaging and tactics for moving in that direction. So I often pick these up at the newsstand at Union Station, but Harold, I am here to tell you tonight that I ain't going to do that anymore. Why? Because I have a present for you. Here is my subscription and my subscription check. Okay. I have finally decided to subscribe to the American Prospect magazine. It is a magazine very much deserving of your support, and I hope some of you tonight will consider supporting it as well. So, Leticia mentioned, and I suspect many people in this room know, that tonight is the 66th anniversary of the American obliteration of the Japanese city of Nagasaki. If I may, just please raise your hand if you've heard of the Japanese city of Nagasaki. Yeah, good, thank you, pretty much everyone. Please raise your hand if you've heard of a Japanese city called Hiroshima. Good, thank you very much. Please raise your hand if you've heard of a Japanese city called Kokura. Kokura. A few, but not nearly as many. I would like to tell you something about this Japanese city of Kokura. It's very unremarkable. It is a medium-sized city, maybe about 750,000 people. It has a well-preserved, maybe 400 or 500-year-old temple near the city center, but not a whole lot that is remarkable about it. It is pretty much like most medium-sized cities elsewhere in Japan, and even, we could say, other medium-sized cities elsewhere all around the world. Except for one thing, one episode in its history which makes it completely unique in all the history of the human race. On the morning of August 9th, 1945, for an American B-29 bomber called Boxcar, carrying the world's third atom bomb. The first was the desert test in New Mexico, the second was Hiroshima, and the third was in this plane Boxcar. Kokura was the target. Nagasaki was not the target. Kokura was the target. The mission was bedeviled by problems from the outset. Boxcar takes off from the island of Tinian in the South Pacific with one other B-29 carrying instruments, and a fuel pump fails on Boxcar immediately. The commander, Major Charles Sweeney, decided to proceed. A few hours later, they arrive off the coast of Japan. They're supposed to meet up with a third B-29, a photographic plane. Never showed up. They waited for about an hour for this third B-29 to show up. Major Sweeney again decided to proceed. A few hours after that, they arrive over the city of Kokura itself. But there was just one small problem. They couldn't see it. The city of Kokura was completely covered over by clouds, by haze, and how's this for historical irony? By the still churning smoke from American firebombing raids several cities away several days earlier. the twin